Welcome back, everybody, to another Bible study. Today we are in 1 Chronicles chapter 6. We're going to talk all about the Levites. There are 81 verses in this chapter, so we have a lot to cover. Let's first cover our timeline. 1 Chronicles, at least the chapter 10 through the end of the chapter, is primarily about David's reign, which spanned about 40 years, from the years 1055 BC to about 1015 BC. The key characters in chapter 6 are going to be Levi. He was a son of Jacob, or Israel. His descendants, known as the tribe of Levi, were set aside to minister in the holy things of God, in the tabernacle and in the temple, offering sacrifices and worshiping. Next, we're going to talk about Kohath, Merari, and Gershon. These were the sons of Levi. We'll talk about why they're significant in the outline section. Aaron was the brother of Moses and the first high priest of Israel. And then two guys, Asaph and Heman. I'd like to say He-Man. I will name my first son He-Man. These two men were Levites responsible for the music and the singing at the tabernacle or the temple. I don't know if you can hear them outside, but I have appointed two roosters, to be in charge of the music outside of my apartment. Whether or not they are Levite roosters, I cannot say. Now, when we're talking about the Levites, the map gets a little bit interesting. The Levites didn't receive a portion of land like all the other tribes when Joshua conquered the Promised Land. You'll notice you won't be able to find a section for Levi in the shades of gray there. Instead, the Levites were assigned cities within the territories of the other tribes. So over to page number 2, let's talk about these 81 verses. Let's talk about the first 30 verses first. The descendants of Levi. Yes, we're still in the genealogy section of 1 Chronicles, the first 9 chapters. So talk about Levi. Levi was, as I mentioned, one of Jacob's sons, and he took a special role in Israel, at least his family did. They became a tribe that was dedicated to the service and to the worship of the Lord. The priests were descendants of Levi. 1 Chronicles chapter 6 records Levi's family through his 3 sons, which were significant: Kohath, Gershon, and Merari. Now, the reason we need to talk about Levi's 3 sons is because the descendants of Levi, the families that came from him, were assigned specific jobs in the service of the Lord based on which of the 3 sons they descended from. You'll find several prominent names in this short genealogy, including Moses, who was a descendant of Kohath. Also Aaron, Moses' brother, the first high priest, he was a descendant of Kohath. And then one other guy, Samuel, who we talked about quite a bit. He was a prophet, and he was also from the from the family of Kohath. Let's talk about the next 17 verses or so, verses 31 through 48, the Levites who are in charge of the service of song. This section documents the individuals that David appointed to manage the worship music at the tabernacle and then later at the temple. 2 names stand out from amongst this list who we introduced in our characters section: Heman and Asaph. Now, Psalm 88 is attributed to Heman. So if you take a look at Psalm 88, you'll see Heman's name appear, later on in the Old Testament. So that's kind of why he's notable. And then Asaph is mentioned several times in the Bible. At least 12, these chickens are ridiculous. At least 12 psalms are attributed to him. It appears the singers amongst the Levites later became known by Asaph's name. They were referred to as the sons of Asaph, even though they weren't necessarily his blood relatives, his sons, but because they were singers and they carried on that tradition, that practice in the temple, they became known as the sons of Asaph. Next up, verses 49 through 53, the family of Aaron. Aaron was the first high priest of Israel, and God assigned his family the role of offering sacrifices in the tabernacle and then in the temple. A record of his sons is recorded in verses 50 through 53. And now finally, verses 54 through 81, the cities belonging to the Levites. So as I mentioned, unlike the other tribes, the Levites didn't get a portion of land cut out for them that their descendants got to live in and to inherit. Instead, they received cities that were in the territories of the other tribes. So this last section of the chapter is a record of the cities and the pasture lands that were assigned to the Levites. The section is divided up by family. The cities assigned to the family of Kohath are listed first. Next, the cities that belong to the family of Gershon, and then finally the cities that belong to the family of Merari. Okay, so we made it through 81 verses. It didn't take us too long. Thanks for joining us. Our application for today, let's talk about it before we finish up. Why were these records important? Why do we have to have all these family names and figuring out who you descended from? Well, these records would have been important to the generations who lived hundreds of years after Levi, who still wanted to participate in temple worship, who wanted to follow the law that God gave to the Israelite people, because it would have allowed those Levites to figure out the role that they were supposed to play in worship based on their family, and they needed these records to figure that out and to trace it back. Notice that Aaron, as the high priest, he had a specific role. Each of the Levitical families had specific roles and specific jobs. Asaph and Heman had specific roles. The Old Testament makes it very clear to us that God cares about roles, and he doesn't have a problem with roles that sometimes limit who can fill those roles. So when we're given instructions in the New Testament about roles, we certainly shouldn't disregard them. God speaks specifically about the roles that he intends to exist within the family and within the church. God has assigned different roles to men, to women, to deacons, to elders, to teachers. I know it isn't culturally trendy to limit people to certain roles based on qualifications or gender, but one thing that you see very clearly in the Bible is that God does not have a problem with this. In fact, he instructs it to be done. So if we are going to follow God's word, we're going to have to, in some cases, disregard what is trendy in our culture.